narrative, Joseph bringing his family to Egypt, and Jacob dying, and Joseph's brothers coming and begging for mercy, and Joseph telling his brothers, "It's cool, I love you." We're going to skip ahead a little bit, actually a few hundred years. Between where we left off last week and where we pick up our story today, the Israelites stayed in Egypt. Joseph's brothers had children, their children had children, their children's children had children, on down for several centuries. And all was fine for the first couple of centuries, and then things got problematic. Turned out that a promise made by one pharaoh to one man doesn't necessarily last forever. So the promise that Pharaoh made to Joseph, saying that he could be in charge of the whole kingdom, that he could have half of the country, that he would be able to do whatever he wanted with his family, was forgotten by Pharaoh's great-great-grandson. And Pharaoh's great-great-grandson looked around and said, "Hey, there are a lot of these Israelites, these Hebrew people living amongst my people, and they don't really belong here. But since they're here, maybe I could make them work for me, for free, forever." And so the Hebrew people found themselves in slavery. They were enslaved in the land of Egypt for generations. But after a while, Exodus tells us that God remembered the covenant that God had made with the Israelites and called Moses, a Hebrew-born but Egyptian-raised man, to lead them out of captivity and back to Canaan. And it doesn't go very well at first. Doesn't go very well at second. In fact, it really doesn't go very well at ninth, for that matter. Moses goes to the new Pharaoh and tells him, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh thinks about it for not any amount of time whatsoever and says no. And so God sends a plague. First, the river turns red as blood. And then Moses goes back to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh says, "No, still not doing it. Don't care about the blood river." And then there are frogs, and this continues, and there are flies, and there are gnats, and there are mites, and there are boils, and there are hail, and there are thunder and lightning, and there are locusts, and livestock dying, and all sorts of terrible things, until the whole land is dark. Very, very dark, because the ninth plague is darkness covering the land, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And still, Pharaoh is refusing to let the Hebrew people go. So finally, God tells Moses it's time for the plague to end all plagues.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be a-year-old males, without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt.
Now, some of the details of this meal seem a bit odd to me. In my life, broadly speaking, home-cooked meals tend to fall into two general categories. There are meals that I need to prepare and eat quickly because I am in a hurry. And then there are meals that I spend a lot of time preparing, so I'm going to take my time enjoying them as well. I'm not going to spend 3 days brining and preparing a Thanksgiving turkey, plus several hours cooking it and making all of the side dishes, and then throw the meat into a sandwich and eat it over the kitchen sink in a couple of minutes. I suspect you wouldn't either. But the meal that God instructs the Israelites to make takes 4 days to prepare. And then they are told to put on their traveling clothes and eat the meal as quickly as they can. They're told that they are in such a rush that they can't even wait for yeasty bread to rise. Oh, and they need to put some blood on the doorposts. So they do. And that night, God brings a horrid plague down on all of Egypt. The firstborn sons of every person or animal in homes without bloody doorposts die. And at last, Pharaoh sets the Israelites free. They're dressed and ready to go thanks to their weird celebration meal, and they get out of town. Before they're even far enough away to be safe from Pharaoh's revenge, God gives Moses and the people another instruction.
The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal." Then Moses said to the people, "Commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you ought to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during these 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt."
Now, the longer part of this instruction is generally familiar to us. It's the institution of Passover meal, which in Christian tradition was instituted as the Eucharist by Jesus, the meal that we just celebrated a few moments ago. And within Jewish tradition, it remains a very important holiday in which families gather and remember and tell the story of being freed from the bondage in Egypt. But there's this other command that I know I've glossed over in the past. It happens right in the beginning of this second passage, and it's a command to consecrate all of the firstborn. Now, our text today said firstborn males, but the language originally is actually a little ambiguous. It doesn't say the firstborn son. It doesn't even say each man's heir. It doesn't even just say firstborn humans. What the text suggests is the first offspring born to every human woman and every female animal in your possession, in your family. And the placement of this command seems odd. at first. They are still escaping Egypt. In a short while, we will find out that Pharaoh's mind, which was first grieved and led him to say, "Get out of here, I don't want to see you again," is quickly going to turn to revenge, and he is going to send his army after the Israelites to bring them back, bring them into slavery, and to treat them even more cruelly than they've ever been treated before. This doesn't feel like the time to be arranging special feasts, to be setting up anniversaries, to be talking about how the calendar is going to look a year from now, 10 years from now, a generation from now. This feels like it should probably be the time to run, because you are about to be chased. But before they cross the Sea of Reeds, before they enter the wilderness, before they get anywhere near Canaan, God wants to make it clear to these people that God is different from Pharaoh. That what they are about to enter into, while it may be difficult, while it may be unfamiliar, is guaranteed to be better than the life that they are leaving. Now, it was a common expectation within this culture that each culture's God, each people group's God, had this deal with them. That they were to live a certain way, and in living that certain way, their God would bless them, would keep them in the land, would allow them graciously to continue living there. It was almost like a landlord-renter agreement, with the God serving as the landlord and the people being the tenants. Now, Pharaoh had established himself as being the god of the Egyptians, the embodiment of the god Ra. And God's requirement of the Hebrew people was, each and every one of you belongs to me. That was how Pharaoh saw it. And you will serve me, and you will get nothing out of it, except maybe the fact that I will let you live, and I will give you enough food that you'll be able to go back and continue working for me again tomorrow. I might decide to kill your children. I might decide that you need to leave and go live in the desert. I might decide to cut your rations, and you are going to say, "Thank you, Pharaoh, you are a wonderful God." God says, it's not going to be like that with me. Your duty to me is not going to be what your duty to Pharaoh was. Instead, what I want you to do is consecrate the first things to me. Firstborn children, firstborn livestock, the first fruits of the field, and even those things, as we read further in the law, are given right back to the people. God doesn't hold on to the offerings and build giant palaces for God. God doesn't require that these things go to God's many wives and children in military endeavors. What God does is say, bring your stuff to the temple. You get to eat some of it right off the bat. You're going to have a nice barbecue. It's going to be fun. And what's left over is going to feed some of my priests. But for the most part, it's going to go help those in your community that are in need. Because that's what God is about. It's not about military. It's not about conquest. It's not about building giant palaces or displaying the splendor of God on earth. The earth is God's splendor. We can't improve on it. The heavens are God's splendor. There's no way that we are going to build a palace so marvelous that we can say, wow, that is even better than the night sky in the entire world. Yeah, good job us. We built a thing that's great for God. God doesn't care. But what God wants each of us to do is to give what is first in our lives to God. Now, this is refined over time. It starts off as all of the firstborn. Eventually, it becomes just the firstborn sons. And then, after a while, God says, you know what, just give me the tribe of Levi, which is approximately 1/12 of your group. They will come and serve me, and you'll just have to support them with your crops and your livestock, and we'll keep doing the whole wealth distribution to provide for the poor around here. It gets narrowed down over time But the message remains the same, that God is not interested in owning slaves. God has no desire to dictate absolutely every movement of your life so that all you can do is work for God and be miserable and feel terrible. God is not looking for a people that serve God out of fear of wrath and retribution. And this is a thing that we have unfortunately set aside often in the Christian church. One of the most famous sermons in this tradition of the United Church of Christ dates back to the 18th century Congregationalists at the height of the Great Awakening, when Jonathan Edwards went around from town to town preaching a sermon entitled "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." And we hear about this sermon and we kind of half-heartedly chuckle about it and say, oh, weren't those strange times back when people were afraid of God? But then when we're honest with ourselves, those times haven't really ended. There is still so much fear-mongering that goes on regarding, if you don't live this way, God will punish you. If you don't say these magic words, God will cause you to be tormented forever. If you don't say that you are a Christian, if you don't tithe, if you don't come to church every single Sunday, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, God is mad, God is coming for you, and God is going to punish you. But we look to this very beginning of the relationship of God with the people of Israel, and it's clear that this is not the case. God does not want scared people serving God out of fear of retribution. Instead, God says, I want to have a loving relationship with everyone who chooses to put me first in their life. Now, today, that call to put God first remains on us, and yet it has changed once again. Most of us in this room do not have fields and livestock. Increasing number of people in this country do not have firstborn children either. Even so, we are able to put our faith first. Simply by being here this morning, you have made a declaration that you have decided to give the first part of your week to God. And by choosing to participate in the mission and the life of our church, you have said that you are going to give the first fruits of what you have to offer in your time and your finances to God. And when we do that, amazing things can happen.